Huh, that's interesting. Generative Expand. What does this do? Whoa, that's awesome. But is it? What the heck? Why does it look so bad? Come on, artificial intelligence, you can do better than that. Adobe has just released Photoshop 2024. And with that comes all of the generative fill artificial intelligence that we've all been waiting for. At least I have, because I haven't been playing around with the beta because I don't really like the fact that they made the beta public. I'll digress on that one. But it's interesting because in the past, Adobe would normally release a big Photoshop update like this during something like Photoshop World in the past, or more recently, Adobe Max. But just randomly, overnight, I show up to my desk yesterday and there's an update for Photoshop 2024, which makes this probably the most anticlimactic Photoshop update I've ever seen to date. But that's okay, because we have it and it's here and now we can experiment with it. And I want to show you one of my favorite tools that I've been waiting for with this new release packed with generative AI elements. And that's the Generative Expand. And that's a way that we can expand our canvas while using artificial intelligence to fill in the edges to create data that wasn't necessarily there, which is, quite frankly, pretty awesome. You may be thinking, well, we've always been able to do that with content-aware fill. And yes, we could, but that was a different technology, and it still has a place, and we'll talk about that in this tutorial as well. Let's jump in. I will admit right off the bat, I have a love-hate relationship with the way this Generative Expand works, and you'll find out why now. So this image was from Falls Creek Falls in Washington in the Columbia River Gorge, and I took many shots of this. And this is just an example because I have a really tight shot of this waterfall that this tutorial works out really well for. So let's say this is the only image I have though, this really super tight crop, and I want to expand it out because I feel like I missed a little bit too much of the waterfall at the bottom. That's where this Generative Expand comes in very handy. So what I need to do is expand this canvas, and to help me out, I'm gonna make my image smaller within the bounds of my Photoshop editing, and then we're gonna crop out. So I'll press Control and Spacebar or Command and Spacebar on a Mac, and this would be the hotkey for the magnifying glass. If I click in on my image and then pull up into the left, so like diagonally in the corner to the left, it's going to make the image smaller. Now I'm gonna press C for my crop tool. And I'm going to start to expand this, but I want to expand all the way around the edges of the image. So I'm going to move this out, and what you'll notice is that it's not moving out evenly. If I want this to move out evenly, I'm going to press Alt and Shift. Alt will make it move out evenly from the center, but it lets me do it manually based on what size I want it to be. But if I want it to maintain the aspect ratio, I'll press and hold the Shift key, and that way as it moves out, it will maintain the aspect ratio as I crop this outward. Now, before we press enter on this, we don't want to commit to this. You will see up here in your crop menu, we have this thing called transparent where it says fill. Transparent will leave it with the transparencies on the edges. In the older version of Photoshop, all we had here was content aware fill, but now we have Generative Expand. So I'm going to go ahead and click Generative Expand, and when I press the check mark, you'll notice that Photoshop is going to start doing its thing. And it's going to expand anywhere that there was the transparency there. It's going to fill that in with data that's very similar to the image that we have here. Now, many people fear AI because it's going out and chasing pictures all over the internet to fill in data from pictures all over the internet. That's the assumption. But I don't think that's necessarily true, because if that was the case, I think I would get very different results here. I think what it's doing is it's reading the image and saying, well, maybe we just need to expand these details out, and because we know what a tree looks like, we can make more tree over here, or more branch over here, or more water down here. Now, once we do that, we get a couple of options over here that we can cycle through. This is the default one, but if we click this one, it'll give us a slightly different option, which I think is a little bit better up here in the corners, maybe even a little bit better down here in that corner, but let's see what this option yields as well, okay? This one I think is probably the best out of all three of them. So I've got these three options. If I didn't like these three options, I could go ahead and generate that again, and I can select between those options. Now, one of the things that I don't like about this contextual toolbar is that it just ends up right here down. This is the new thing that they added in 2023.5 and 2024 is the contextual toolbar. So I'm going to grab this and move this up to the top. Now, once we move it up here, we can actually say pin this to this position. That means any image I open up after this, this contextual toolbar will stay up here. But that does it. When I shut down Photoshop and open it up again, I have to move that again. Again, a love-hate relationship with this. I really wish Adobe in the preferences would give us something that allows this to stay up here, or just change this menu bar, whatever. But when we look at this, we say to ourselves, wow, that looks really good. Looks really good. But watch what happens when we zoom in and we're like, oh, I got to take a closer look at this. What? Why is it doing this? You see the difference here? This is all detailed and gorgeous and beautiful. And this looks like someone took Vaseline and smeared it all over the edge of a perfectly good photograph. Why would they do that? Why would generative AI fill do that? Why doesn't this look as detailed? Well, the thing is, you are never going to get it as detailed with an image that's this size. If we go to image and we go to image size, this was taken from a Sony A1, which has a very large image size, like 8,200 pixels by like 5,800 or something like that. But we expanded the edges because we needed more data there. So what is essentially happening? Well, let's take a look at this. That would be kind of like taking the image, the original image that we had here, and making it very small, 1024 by 1024, and expanding it out to fill the edges, because generative AI fill can only fill 1024 by 1024 at any given time. So if you tell it to fill something bigger, it's going to make it 1024 by 1024 and then blow it up. And we all know what happens when we take a small image and we enlarge it. Well, if you don't, watch this. I'm going to press Command or Control J on this and then Control T. And that's going to resize this. If it's not a smart object, when I do this and make this about what would be a 1024 by 1024 image in comparison to the rest of this, if I press Command or Control T to make it larger and go out like this and press Enter, that's essentially what's happening here. That data is being interpolated. It's blowing up. It's taking small details and making them bigger for the sake of making them bigger without actually adding detail. So are we stuck with this crap quality when we expand larger images? No. I've got two alternate methods for you. The first one is kind of tedious, but creates great results, but requires math. But we can make all that stuff a lot easier for us here in Photoshop. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just turn the eyeball preview off on this because we are going to need to see the transparency here to do what I'm about to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to image and I'm going to go to image size. Okay, so if we look at this, we essentially need to make a grid on our image that will fill this evenly at the 1024, with 1024 being our basis for the grid, okay, and not going any bigger than that. So what I need to do is I need to take 9,280 and divide it by 1024 to see how many columns I'm going to need. 9,280 divided by 1024 equals about 9. We'll just go with 9, okay? And then 6,186 divided by 1024 equals about 6. We'll just go with 6. So I need 9 columns and 6 rows. Okay, so to do this, you may have never been taught this stuff before. This is actually kind of cool. We're going to go up to View and then go to Guides and then New Guide Layout. So I need columns and rows. You can make a preset for this if you'd like. If this is something that you're going to do often, you can save this and always have this preset there. Let's say you have this Sony A1, which I'll save this preset for this because I'm going to need this later if I ever want to use this. I'm going to need columns and I'm going to need rows. Now, some of this stuff will be default based on what you have already entered in. So we'll talk about what a gutter is in a second here. But I needed 9 columns and 6 rows. Okay, so this will divide my image into 9 columns and 6 rows that are equal on 1024 by 1024, so that when we do the generative fill, we actually get a pretty decent result. Okay, so the gutter, I like to put a gutter in here so I get a little bit of overlap in between each one of these. It's going to offset what the 1024 is by a little bit, and that's okay. I'm not too concerned. It doesn't have to be perfect because there's other things that we're going to need to do to make this look better anyway. So I'm going to give myself a 20 pixel gutter, which will give me room for overlap, and I'll press OK. Now, one of the things that I don't want to do here is I don't necessarily want to fill in each and every square. I just want to do this little band that's along the top. So I need to take my marquee tool. So what you'll see here in the marquee tool is that it's set to normal. And I need this to be a fixed size because I want this to be about 1024, but I need to know exactly how big that is. So if I zoom in here, I'll go Control R or Command R to get a ruler. It's going to be a little bit bigger than 1024 there. Let's go like 1040. Okay, so my width is going to be 1040 pixels. And my height is going to be, looks like here's 0, here's 300, about 300 pixels. So I'm going to want some overlap everywhere I go with this one. So I'm going to want this overlap everywhere I go with this one. I'll commit to that and press enter. Now with my marquee tool, instead of me having to draw every one of these, if it's set to normal size, I'll have to draw every one of these every time. And it's not that big of a deal because we have the guides that will stop us because they're magnetic. You could do it that way if you'd like, but I like to do things a little bit faster. So I have this fixed size set up. So once I click here, guess what? It's almost exactly the size that I need. Now up in the generative fill, I click inside here and all I have to do is press generate and it will automatically fill in that space for me. Now it's going to take about 10 seconds per block, maybe a little bit longer. During my procedure, when I was experimenting with this, it took about 15 to 25 minutes for me to do this entire process, which is kind of a pain. You'll notice here that even though the detail isn't perfect, it's definitely better than what we received here. So all we'll need to do with this after we're done with this is maybe some mild sharpening to make that look better. So after I've got that one set up, I need to go around the entire image in every one of these spaces to make that work. Yes, this is the alternate over this crap that we get. Okay, it's a long process, but it does produce some great results. So it is actually worth it. I'm going to go ahead and for this one, I will probably just use a normal size here on my marquee tool and I'll draw a little bit of overlap between what was already there and this area right here. And I'll go into my generative fill and say generate. Okay, so I could have gone all the way along the top first and then done my sides. However that looks, it doesn't necessarily matter which order you do it. This is a long, tedious process though, and I will do the magic of a cooking show in a second here, so we don't have to look at every one of these. But I will also say that as you create these variations, I'm going to show you the final, what I've already done, because it takes a long time to do this. But what you will want to do before you move from one space to the next is select the variation that you're going to want for this before moving on. Because if you try to select the variation for it afterwards, with this overlap here, the two might not be the same. So you're going to want to make sure that you get that set the way you want it to be set going forward. Okay, so one more time here, I'll just show you this. That's normal, where we draw whatever we want with our marquee tool. And then we have the fixed size where all I have to do is click here and we now have that exactly where we want it to be. We got a little bit of overlap there on both sides. And then we'll go ahead and press generate and that'll do the trick. I'm not going to do this again because like I said, it has taken me a long time to go all the way around this entire image. So I've already kind of done it for you here on this one. This is how many I needed to do for this one. I did slightly less grids because I didn't want to do this for 40 different things all the way around the image or possibly more. This one I ended up doing 25 that go all the way around the image and it actually looks pretty good. So if we zoom in close here, we zoom in right to the edge here, it's pretty darn good. It probably does need to be sharpened a little bit, but it's not that bad. It actually looks pretty decent. Okay, I got some really good results as I went all the way around, even in tricky areas like this spot right here. So if we open this up and we go into our generative fill there, that's going to be probably right about here. Nope, right about here. Exactly. Okay, so like I was saying, you want to make sure that you select your variations before you finish, because if we do this and select the variation now, this variation below it was based off of the variation that was above it when it was first selected. So we want to make sure we select those variations before we move from spot to spot to spot. Some people might say to themselves, or to me right now, Blake, would you really recommend doing this? And I would say that if the image is worth it, absolutely. I will take all the time in the world to make my images look as best as possible. I do need to throw some caution to the wind though, because if you do choose to use these generative artificial intelligence prompts after November 1st, 2023, Adobe is moving to a credit-based system. And what that means is that depending on the plan that you will have a credit system of how many generative AI prompts you can run in any given month. For me, I'm on the photography plan. I will get 250 credits every single month. When I did this tutorial, I had to run 25 different prompts to fill in the gaps on that one image. Now, if I made some errors or issues or had some, if I redid a prompt because I didn't like it or generated it multiple times, that will count against my generative fill credits. So in this case, I might only be able to do 9 or 10 images like this. Hopefully this doesn't happen to me 9 or 10 times a month, but you get the point, okay? If you use these credits to fill in that space, then you're gonna have an issue. Now, there also is the possibility that Adobe will be moving out of that 1024 restriction, and there'll be a higher resolution. And at that point, we will have a better solution and not have to run quite as many generative prompts. But just know that there will be a credit system, and these will count against those credits. Is it worth it? It can be. The other method I have for you might be more worth it. So let's take a look at this though. I would say that after we do this, we are probably going to want to sharpen this. So I'm going to duplicate this entire group. I basically put all of these grid layers into a group by clicking on the top one, shift clicking on the bottom one, and then I press Control G or Command G on a Mac, which then automatically put them in a group for me. So now I can duplicate this group by pressing Command or Control J, and then I need to merge that. So I can right click and I can say merge group, or I can just press Control E and it will automatically merge just the layers that I have selected in that group. So now what I can do with this is I can make this basically a high pass sharpen so that I could get this to match the sharpness of this, or at least as best as I can. Before I do the high pass filter, I'm gonna set this up for success. And I know that linear light is typically what I use for my high pass sharpening. So I'm gonna set this to the linear light blend mode. Then I'll go to filter, I'll go to other, and I'll go to high pass. And this is essentially the way I like to sharpen. I think it gives me the best sharpening results. So I'm gonna choose a sharpness here that is probably around, I'd say probably one or 2 pixels. If you go too high, that's okay, because linear light takes its algorithm based on fill. So if I take the fill and I move this down, I can get that to roughly match the sharpness of this. And it's not going to be perfect, because what I noticed here is generative AI fill does not like to make noise. So you'll see that this area has noise and this area doesn't. So it's not going to create the exact same noise pattern, which in that case, we also might need to go to filter, go to noise, and as crazy as it sounds, add noise. Okay. I like to make this a Gaussian noise and definitely monochromatic, because we don't want to add any color noise to that. That's just not good. And we'll move this down until we get it about right. It's probably going to be, I would say, just type it in, probably 1 pixel. Yeah, maybe 1.2. That'll be about right. So essentially we add noise to that high pass sharpen and then high pass sharpen. And we get something that looks pretty darn good and passable. But like I said, this is a process. In order to create this, I had to create that grid pattern. Then I had to use generative AI fill in every single one of those blocks at 1024, not going too big, trying to maintain that space. If you do it manually, it's a pain. Doing the fixed size on that marquee can be really helpful, and using those grids really is awesome. Command or Control H will bring back the grids or make them go away. So if you press Control H on a PC or Command H on a Mac, the grids come on and go away, okay? Going back over to this image, what's my other alternate method? If this image takes too long, or you're like, I don't even wanna use that, what should I do instead, Blake? Well, what I would do instead is I would use content-aware fill to do that. So let's go back to the beginning of all of this work that we did here. Let's go back here. And we are going to go into the crop tool, C for the crop tool, and change this to content aware fill. And I'm going to click on the outside. Again, we press and hold Alt to maintain moving from the middle so it goes out on all sides, and then Shift to maintain aspect ratio. Okay. Now with content aware fill, I'll press enter and Photoshop will work its old magic, not its new magic, its old magic of filling in the outside edges with data. Now the data that it fills in there is not generative AI data. It's not artificial intelligence data. Now I would venture to say that when we do the expansion of the canvas, the artificial intelligence is smart enough to know what a tree is, what a tree limb is. Content aware fill is not. It's just going to take what is there and try to fill it in. But it does it in a far superior way in that we don't have to sharpen anything or add any noise because it's using the detail and the data that is already in the image that it took it from. So it's going to look like crap in some areas. What do we do here? Well, in this case, I would say we need to fill this area in. In this case, we could probably just fill this area, just grab the lasso tool and make sure we make small adjustments here and then use generative fill and fill those areas in. We don't have to type anything here. We just press generate and we'll see what data is going to be selected from the generative AI fill to fill in these spaces. That way we don't have to go around the entire canvas and spend 15 to 25 minutes filling in that space, okay? And we can choose our alternate method here or our alternate choices here. That's a good one there, okay? Another possible alternative here is to actually use the remove tool, because the remove tool also uses AI or artificial intelligence in order to fill in some of these areas. So if you have troublesome areas, it's not just the remove tool, it could also be the add tool. It really depends on what data and what you feed it. So let's make a new layer here so all of this work can be done on a new layer. What we're also going to need to do here is we're going to need to make sure that we have this checked here, which is going to sample all the content from all visible layers. I will say that if you have any layers above this that are visible, you're going to want to turn them off and just work on this layer, or put this layer on top of all of the visible layers and go from there. Otherwise, it's going to do some funky things. So we have some lines here that don't really look that great, but what I'm going to do here is if I click right here and move over this way, you'll see that the remove tool is going to analyze the data that's in here, and in some cases, add some stuff instead of remove that stuff. It may even, in this space, add more of that tree to it. It's not always predictable, but in a lot of my experimentation, I have found that if I do something like this, it not only removes that, but it adds based on what is being fed into this side of that. So we'll see if it expands that out, and it does. It does add a little bit more tree to that. You'll see here that we don't have anything right here, so you have two options. You either trace this entire tree like this so that it gets rid of that, hopefully, or you would just highlight around here and hope that it selects some of that stuff. A lot of this is unpredictable. It's just part of the reality of the situation. It's artificial intelligence doing its magic. Okay, so we also have some detail here that doesn't look right. This can be time consuming as well. It can be almost as time consuming as filling in each and every little space, depending on how much you have going on and how many things you have open. And every once in a while, you might get an error message like this because not enough pixels are selected. So let's do this. Let's just go like this and select some more for it and see what it says there. I also would recommend that if you're going to use the remove tool for this, that you remove after every stroke and you slowly go around the entire canvas, because if you don't remove after every stroke and you have it set so that you just paint everywhere and press enter, you won't know when you need to regenerate a new one, because this part over here might look good, but the part on the other side might not. And if you don't take the time to go around and look at every little aspect of it, then it might not look that great. So this could be used to just go around the entire canvas and fill those spaces in. This was supposed to be a quick tutorial on how to use the expand option here, which turned into like a mini masterclass on expanding your canvas. The thing that I want you to take away from this, though, is that you have options, and that generative fill AI is powerful, yes, but it's not quite there yet. Until generative fill can fill in that space for me and make it the exact same size and replicate the noise, I don't think it's far superior to something like content aware fill and using the tedious remove tool to go through each and every element. Also, from my understanding, that method of using the remove tool instead of using generative AI to fill in anything, where we use content aware fill plus the remove tool, won't cost any generative AI credits after November 1st, 2023, as those credits only pertain to generative fill prompts. For me, in my practice, I actually am more inclined to use the content aware fill method with the remove tool than I am to go through that entire canvas and patch every little piece together, because it's just not acceptable when we take the entire image and do it. Thank you for taking the time to watch this. I do sincerely appreciate it. And if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing. I like to take very difficult things in Photoshop and make them seemingly simple, or in this case, more difficult, so that you can use them in your workflow today.